Here
we are.
We are live. And today we are discussing Cane Toads, a documentary selected by Seth Michael May. Seth, tell us about this selection and why you picked it.
I saw Cane Toads. Cane Toads came out in 1988. So I must have seen Cane Toads in the 90s from the cult film section, and I believe Kim's Underground Video. Remember Kim's?
Yes.
Yeah, from St. Mark's Place.
Yeah, they had a cult film section, and Cane Toads was there. And there was this picture of this little girl who's in the film, and a toad about the size of her head. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. And I flipped it over, and it seemed to be kind of a whimsical documentary. So I took it home, and me and my two friends watched it, and we couldn't believe it. Like it's a weird, fun documentary, although about a really serious subject. In fact, since watching Cane Toads, I found out that there's 2 TED Talks about Cane Toads. There's
what's the documentary about? What's the basic gist of this whole thing?
The basic gist of Cane Toads is there was a beetle that was.
Seth, are you keeping the screen? Are you? Hang on a second, Seth. Yeah. You keep the screen keeps moving around. Are you holding it?
Hold on. Oh, the wire. Hold on.
Yeah.
I see what.
Okay.
Okay. Look. Okay. Let me just put my hand there. So the sugarcane beetle came and started ravaging sugarcane plantations all over the world. Some snake oil salesman went to a a convention, and said, well, we have a solution in Central America. There are these toads, and you could release them in these fields, and they'll eat all the beetles. Right. But it didn't work, because the beetles fly, and when they're larvae, they're underground in the roots of the sugarcane. So the toads, which were released evidently in Hawaii and Australia, and now they're in Texas and Florida, although that's not covered in this documentary, they proceeded to eat everything. And because they're also poisonous, they started poisoning dogs that bit them, snakes that bit them. They were eating rare birds, eggs. They were eating little mouse-sized marsupials that are endangered in Australia. They breed like crazy. So
and also like apex predators that try to hunt them. I mean, not just dogs.
Yeah, there are cases of saltwater crocodiles dying because they ate a cane toad.
Yeah, because of the poison they emit.
Yeah. So,
well, this is a striking example of human beings. Well, in this case, a snake oil salesman, but the intent is humans playing God and nature fucking them.
Yeah. I mean, there are cases of this all over. There's the Asian carp that they are electrocuting in the Great Lakes, because if it gets into the Great Lakes, it'll eat all the indigenous fishing.
Yeah, but even to Dan, just to back up a second, even to Dan's point, I mean, like you can say playing God, but humans have a history of introducing different kinds of, or manipulating the ecology in such a way to create a more balance or to benefit not just humanity, but the whole ecosystem. And sometimes we do it more successfully. Sometimes we do it less successfully. This would be an example of a complete disaster. Complete failure. And the question is, like, why does this happen in this particular case? And what, like, and how often do these kinds of things happen versus having like ecologists who actually know what they're doing?
Though I'm just surprised that some department in the federal government of Australia didn't actually look into this.
Well, it's interesting that it happened in Australia because they had the same problem with rabbits. They brought over rabbits and foxes to hunt, and the rabbits had nobody to hunt them down. So they almost destroyed their entire ecosystem with rabbits. They made a rabbit-proof fence.
Yeah.
And in this case, I guess it was a convention, dude. And there were some government bureaucrats, and they said, well, this is a good idea. They've done it in Hawaii.
Let's scale it up to how the different governments around the world handled the most recent schmovich epidemic. We can't say that word on here. And then you can extrapolate that it's the norm for stupid bureaucrats.
Can we also talk about Australia and how they handled
exactly.
COVID?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it's kind of ironic.
They have a history now. Now we know they have it. Now we can explain their behavior a little bit better. Again, this was a colony of this was a colony of criminals, correct?
Well, not all Australia. That's one part of Australia, actually.
Right.
There's different parts.
But all you need is one bad apple to spoil the bunch, and they had a lot of bad apples over there.
Yeah, they had a lot of bad apples. But
we're being unfair. I like the nice people.
I love the
nice people.
Say this.
Yeah.
Listen, and the criminal elements have actually, criminal elements historically, they are like they perform a very important role in the evolution of nations. I mean, if it the gangsters were the ones that helped the federal government grow into this gargantuan thing that it is today in America, and to allow for they may be the symptoms of a deeper problem, but they're very important signals. You got the mafia is a very important signaling mechanism. So we have it. I don't know. I don't. Australia. But I don't really know that much about it. So
well, one thing you should know about Australia, because we were talking a little about evolution, is if you go to the other continents, there's very few marsupials. Marsupials exist in Australia because that part of Pangea floated away. And marsupials, except for like opossums and some tree kangaroos in Southeast Asia, were all killed off by other predators. So they have a very unique ecosystem, which you can't tamper with very much. So that when you introduce an invasive species into Australia, it's a big fucking deal.
So what in particular about the ecosystem? I know you tried to explain that to some degree, but can you go into more detail about what it is, particularly about the Australian ecosystem, that makes it more vulnerable or more sensitive to this type of thing?
Well, let me just preface this by saying the movie actually doesn't do a good job at explaining this at all.
No, it doesn't.
It's a very short documentary.
I understand.
And it's almost I'm just telling the audience it's a very short documentary.
45 minutes. Yeah.
It's really a primer for the kind of the discussion that we're having right now.
Yeah.
Right.
This is going to be a little different than our typical podcast where we go into all the details of the movie. I think we're going to probably end up talking a lot more about the phenomenon itself, because there's so much about it that isn't touched.
About the endearing characters that they.
Oh no, we'll get into that. Yeah, we will. But anyway.
I think that's kind of the theme of it. Is like you have these unique invasive animals. You have these unique animals in Australia. Australia is very unique, and then the Australians themselves, the characters that they pull, are very unique in an almost mockumentary kind of way. You can't even believe some of them.
So Australia, but so just because I know, Seth, you're more of an expert about this than
I love animals.
The rest of us, and so maybe how much do you know about the climate in Australia? Do they have a mixed climate? And also this region that we're talking about, like just the audience knows, this is like a thin strip in Queensland. Basically,
you think of northern Australia, right?
Yeah, northeastern, like north central to northeastern Australia. It's kind of like imagine a stripe going along the coastal edge from north central to northeastern to eastern Australia.
Because they wouldn't merge into the uninhabitable desert parts of Australia.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly.
So most of Australia,
they need a lot of water in order to
of course.
breed,
most of Australia, if you meet an Australian, they live on the coast.
Yeah.
The outback is completely Aborigines and uninhabited national park, basically. So Australians have a unique relationship with nature because it's so, first of all, a lot of things in Australia are deadly poisonous. They have the most poisonous snakes. They have the most poisonous spiders in the world. However, the cane toad, if it's bitten by a snake, the snake will either spit it out or die because the cane toad is poisonous. And the spiders, the cane toad will just eat it. So those are and then
Amazing.
the other thing is what I was saying is when you put Pangea together, the one mega continent, all these animals that we have all over the world were once all over the mega continent. Marsupials got killed off, or their niche was taken by more successful things like rats, rodents, primates, shrews. A marsupial is a pouched animal like a kangaroo. There are marsupials that are tiny, marsupials that are big, marsupials that are like little grubs that have to crawl into a pouch and grow big like a kangaroo.
So that's basically the definition of a marsupial is something that carries their babies in a pouch?
In a pouch. The baby is born from the uterus and then crawls into a pouch where the nipples are and then lives that way for a while. Well, here's the thing is that they have every type of marsupials. They have marsupials like koala bears that only eat eucalyptus leaves. They have marsupials like kangaroos that eat grasses and they have marsupials that are like little mice. They're marsupial mice. They have
obviously kangaroos are in a sense
almost
bipedal.
Yeah.
But I'm sure a lot of other ones that are quadrupedal.
Yeah. So these things are eating everything, and they're also eating all the things that an insectivore marsupial would eat, because they're much more successful at eating the bugs. They're much more successful at taking over the ponds.
Right.
So, even snakes, other amphibians, they're all birds. They were eating birds' eggs and bird babies like crazy. And I thought one of the most interesting things is, and I've never seen this with an amphibian or a reptile for that matter, but these are amphibians. People are putting out dog kibble in this movie. These old Australians are like, they're friends. They're good friends.
It's like, you know what that is? It's like the crazy lady in Central Park or crazy guy in Central Park with the pigeons.
Yeah.
He's just like talks to himself and like has just pigeons just covering him, and because he's constantly giving them breadcrumbs and shit. It's like the equivalent of that, but the outback version of it.
Or the raccoon man from Canada.
Yeah.
You ever see that guy?
Or the rat guy from South America who
can
train all the rats to do all these crazy things.
There is this enduring couple, right? It's not just one, it's two.
It's a guy and a gal.
A guy and a gal, and they must be like, I guess they don't have kids who visit them anymore, or I don't know, but they
love those damn toads.
They put out kibble for the dogs and cats, and they hop up on their porch and they fucking eat them. They eat kibble.
Yeah, why not? They eat everything.
I never knew that a toad could do that. I didn't know that toads could eat freaking mice either. Toads will eat mice. I've fed a toad a mouse. I've done that.
No, it's one thing to feed it, but these guys are hunting them. They're just
hunting them. Yeah.
I mean, I didn't know that there were frogs or toads that were large enough to consume a rodent.
There are,
that's the size
but
of my
most
hand.
of them are ambush predators. So, like, I had what's called a Pac-Man frog or a Suriname horn frog, I think it was. And
how big are we talking?
Gets about as big as a pie plate. Mine didn't get that big because I didn't have it that long, but they'll get that big. So you can throw in a mouse and it'll just eat the mouse, but it has these tiny little legs. So it just sits in the mud and it doesn't move anywhere. And, they're a problem too, because people buy them. They're these cute little things and they're sold as Pac-Man frogs. And then, you buy them and then in a year, they're the size of a pie plate and very ugly, and you don't want them anymore. Plus, the idea of throwing some crickets in there was cool, or some worms, but throwing a mouse or a baby rat in there doesn't seem so great. But they don't chase things down. The cane toad chases stuff down. It hunts.
Yeah.
So this is a monster, really.
And they're prolific breeders.
They're very prolific. In fact, there's one point where he says that
there's a whole sex sequence in this film. It's very erotic.
Very erotic. They get on each other and they squeeze the eggs.
And then the eggs, after they're fertilized, they get dropped into these like DNA strand looking strings with these like little bulbs
in the water.
And they produce what? They can produce 30,000 eggs.
30,000 eggs, which grow into tadpoles, which are
wait, is that 30,000 eggs per what? Per year or
per? I think 30,000 eggs per per mating,
per
right?
mating act.
Per mating act, but those males are like jumping
per
from
laying.
female to female. You know?
So they lay 30,000 fertilized eggs at one time. Is that even...
she lays eggs and he spunks all over them. It's called spawning. And they grab each other and they do that. And then the tadpoles, which I'm assuming eat all the food that the fish eat, all the algae and all the little, they're poisonous too. And so they just take over. They turn the entire pond black.
Right.
And then they're born. And that's your next generation of cane toads right there.
That's crazy.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And all because someone thought it was a good idea to sell these to like a sugar. I guess, it's like when you go to Vegas.
No, and here's the greatest irony of the whole thing. It's the thing that they were meant to do, and these toads will eat anything. But they feed at a certain time, and the cane sugar grubs come out at a certain time, and it's a different time. So these two creatures don't even cross paths with each other when they're coming out to feed.
Right.
And so they don't touch a single cane grub, do they?
Not many. I don't think so, unless you're getting very lucky. But there's so many other things for them to eat that are. So you got them, in this documentary. I also sent you guys information that I found out they're in Texas and they're in Florida too. Also because of sugarcane. So they got.
Was that around the same time that they did that?
I don't know if it was the same time, but I mean, it must have been before word got out that it wasn't working.
Did you mention that Australia is one of their main exports with sugarcane? It was high on the list.
It was very high on the list. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, sugar's a drug. Like, people love sugar, so they must have been making,
especially the British.
Sugar is also a necessary nutrient. I mean, it's a very it stores well. It's like the fundamental building block of energy for all life for most life, but certainly for humans. But
it's also an entire industry because
of course it's an entire industry.
Well, yeah, but if you're screwing up an entire industry, you're not you don't have something that's like eating processed sugar. You have something that's destroying the cane itself, and then.
No, of course, but that's what I mean. What I mean is that it's not a surprise that when people discovered sugarcane that it proliferated the way that it did, and that people tried to find as many regions of the world, untapped regions, where they could try to cultivate this thing. It was it was news to me. Yeah, of course.
The British Empire was built on it. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of that had to do with it, and a lot of that had to do with rum as well. But the thing that it was news to me that sugar was even cultivated in Australia, but it makes sense because I guess it has these sort of tropical parts on the coast.
Well, the whole Haitian Revolution that scared the world was in sugar canes in French Haiti. So I guess anywhere there were tropics, they planted sugar cane if it wasn't there indigenously.
Right.
I don't know this, but I imagine the British when they sent their prisoners to this colony, they were using them as labor.
Yeah, they were indentured. A lot of them were it was a form of indentured servitude. It was like, you're going to go here and you're going to help us colonize the place. And after a certain point, you'll gain your freedom and you can have some land and whatever.
Right.
And there were specific types of crimes that would get you sent to Australia. But it was a colonial project at every level.
Yeah. Right. So among the other people who were in this, unique individuals who are in this documentary, there's a little girl who
that was
super weird.
It's super weird because while you can have a pet toad, and I had a pet American toad as a kid, they show this girl kissing the toad and talking about the toad, but then
tickling the toad and borderline tormenting it.
In her mouth, she's going to the hospital.
Well, although that's one thing I did have a question about. It seemed to me that, according to the quote experts that were in on this documentary, that unless you literally manipulated the glands to squeeze them in a certain way, or induced some kind of blunt force trauma sufficient to make the toad freak out, it wouldn't release the venom.
It won't. But
that being said, how can you trust a little girl or a little boy not to accidentally or unaccidentally induce a sufficient blunt force trauma such that it would poison the child? And so it is a little bit peculiar, you know.
Yeah, that scene kept me on my toes.
Yeah, it was a little weird.
It's a little scared.
Weird. Especially because the toad is the size of her head.
Yeah.
These are not like little toads. In fact,
they're like.
Yeah, they say anything in Florida that's over 4 inches is a cane toad, and you can kill it, so long as you don't torture it. But you can run it over with a car. They recommend in this documentary, don't they? You put them in a bag and you put them in the freezer.
Right.
That's what they were doing. They were just gathering them up. And it's a plague. I wanted to talk about this too, because it is one of the biblical plagues. It's not like when they show these toads, it's like a couple toads, like 3 or 4 or 5. It's like hundreds of toads crawling across people's driveways and lawns.
And let's give people a little bit of a sense of scale, even from a broader angle than that. The guy that brought these toads brought them by ship, I believe, and there was only a certain small number that he could gather together.
Right.
We're probably, we're talking about a handful of toads that have spawned to this date. From what the research I did, I believe it was somewhere in the realm of several 100 million of these toads now in that region of Australia, like 10 or 20 fold more toads than there are human beings in Australia. Yeah. There's like there's like 30 toads per Australian. That's like
wow.
You can say the same thing about rats in New York City.
Yeah, I watched a documentary.
Yeah, and somebody brought those here. There didn't used to be Seth, right? There were never rats in the Western Hemisphere.
It's the Norwegian brown rat. They came on the ship.
Cats were one of the few, things brought overseas. Like, for example, they were brought to Turkey to solve a problem.
Yeah,
they actually did solve the problem.
Wait, so cats originated in Persia, correct?
Right, I believe so.
Or even Egypt before that.
Okay.
Yeah. Rat in the Middle East.
Yeah, same general vicinity. So
but we know that the Vikings thought that orange tabbies were lucky. So everywhere you see orange tabbies in port cities, the Vikings were there. You can trace that color. Yeah.
Fascinating.
So cats proliferated. Yeah, cats proliferated throughout the Eurasian landmass relatively quickly and early in human civilization.
That was a success, and they were deliberately brought. Rats, however, probably got on boats, and it was an accident. I don't imagine they brought rats on purpose.
But then rats have become in the last 200 years, 300 years, rats have been very important for research, right?
Yes, that's true.
So,
yeah, there you go.
So, but I mean, I think I saw a documentary called Rats, and most of it was set in New York City. And they said you're always 6 to 10 feet away from a rat in New York City.
That's right.
But not if you're
okay.
So if people knew how many rats we had and where they were, they would never eat out.
Oh yeah,
they would never eat out. And believe me, I know.
I yelped a local restaurant recently and said, it's on my corner for those of you who know what restaurant I'm talking about. But I said when they opened, their portions were bigger, and there were less rats running in and out of the restaurant at night after they closed. Now I see more rats. The prices are the same, and the portions are smaller. So do what you will with.
So let me ask. No, because Dan just said that was it Dan who said they're 6 to 10 feet away from you at any given place?
No,
you
said that. Yeah.
Okay, so Seth, am I to understand then that if I'm walking, in the middle of a large, sidewalk of Manhattan, and I don't see any rats anywhere, the ones that are 6 to 10 feet away from me are like in the sewers right below
I guess they're
me.
under you.
Yeah, they're just right under me, right?
Yeah.
But my understanding is also that these rodents and also other vermin like cockroaches play a huge role in consuming our human waste, defecation and urine and
sure
all
they
that
do.
kind of stuff.
Wow, delightful.
Well, hey, I mean, it's one big. Every creature plays its role, right?
Yeah, no, you're right. It's amazing.
I don't know if that's true. Like, I don't know if it's true that we would be up to our eyeballs in crap if we didn't have these things or not. I've heard that. I think my mother put that in my head when I was a child. But she could be kind of like pulling that from
I don't know.
God knows where.
I just know that when it rains in Chinatown, one of my friends who used to live in Chinatown on the second floor, her cats would pull these, we call them water bugs or June bugs. But it means giant.
It's a euphemism to make you feel better about the fact that it's a big fucking cockroach.
But maybe if we had cane toads let loose in the sewers of New York City, we would have less June bugs and less rats. Not that I
careful what you wish for.
Careful what you wish
would they survive our winters? Would they survive our winters? I don't think so.
Well, we have parrots in Brooklyn that have learned to live under electrical cables and heat lights, and in the steam tunnels. You know the parrots in Brooklyn, the Quaker parrots in Brooklyn.
Not aware of this. No.
Okay, when I was a kid, they always said, "Well, don't throw a parrot out a window because it'll die."
Yeah.
And then
I had that happen. Well, not out the window.
You know, people would flush alligators down the sewers and they'd throw parrots that were annoying out of the windows. Well, someone broke a case of Quaker parrots, I guess with the pet industry, in Brooklyn, and they found their way to some steam pipes and there's a flock of wild parrots that survive the New York winters.
See, this is why I have an instinctual faith in the prevalence of life all over the cosmos.
Well,
I think the cosmos, the life is so unbelievably powerful and has such a will to live. I think biological entities are the most powerful chemical forces in the universe.
Do the Jeff Goldblum line.
Jeff Goldblum, that's what I was thinking.
Oh, was that from
Life
Jurassic Park or something?
Life finds a way.
Yeah. I don't even remember that quote. What is that from? Jurassic Park?
Jurassic
Park, where they take frog DNA and they complete.
Right.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah. I'm trying to think.
We're not supposed to mention that man's movies on. I think that's the one guy we can't talk about his movies on this show because
Steven Spielberg.
Yeah.
Oh, really?
No, because if we do, it just never goes well. And I'm like one of those people who I don't have a single nice thing to say about his stuff. And I'm of the opinion that if you don't have anything nice to say, you shouldn't say anything at all. And I don't want to insult Mr. Spielberg, but that's just my own personal opinion about that.
You know, I've noticed that this is totally off subject, that the greatest beef with Spielberg always comes from Jews.
Well, yeah, for good reason. For good reason. Yeah, absolutely. And my beef with him has a lot of Jewish aspects to it, for sure.
I understand. My brother.
Should we use the Jewish as a cross analogy? The plague of toads on Passover. What plague is that? 2? The second plague?
I don't remember Isaac.
Plague. Okay. You guys are gonna really do this to me right now?
Yeah. It's blood.
Does it matter what the number is?
Just curious.
Yeah. I mean, I think blood is the first one.
Blood's the first one.
Arbe, which means, okay, here's an interesting trivia. I'll change the subject slightly. The locusts are the word for locusts in Hebrew is the same word for many.
Interesting.
Okay.
So literally like the biblical word. Yeah. I wonder if that's just biblical Hebrew or actually, I'm sure there's another word for locusts in modern Hebrew, but in the Bible, the word for locusts is the same word for many.
Right.
Harbe.
That's interesting because in the New Testament, Jesus talks to the guy who's possessed by the demons and says, "What is your name?" And he says, "Our name is Legion, for we are many."
Oh.
That's but I mean that's been translated several times, so I don't know if many and maybe his name is Locust and not Legion.
That's Greek, and so I don't really care.
Yeah,
I'm kidding.
It's all Greek to me.
Yeah.
So Yeah. So basically,
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
there's also a scientist in this, and I think he's American, although he has a.
Yeah, what's up with that? That was wild. He's like
he
the
is
one.
This
Yeah, nerdy Freddie Mercury.
nerdy Freddie Mercury. He's right out of a.
It did look like him.
He looks like a character in a mockumentary in one of what's his name's documentaries.
Yeah,
Christopher Guest.
He looks like a Christopher Guest character.
Yeah, he does.
Like
Like somebody
They
that
all,
was
they
straight
all
out
kind
of
of do.
Yeah,
they all kind of do. Like, this is definitely, if you like Christopher Guest mockumentaries, you'll love Cane Toads.
Well, but it also looked like something out of a BBC or even Australian comedy.
Yeah.
I mean, it looked like The Office. I'm not
But
The Office,
guy,
but shows like that.
This guy is funny because he loves Australian wildlife, and his marsupial cat bites a cane toad and dies in his arms. And then after that, he has a vengeance for the cane toads. But he has this way of speaking where he's like, I would never recommend this happen to anyone. It's very unpleasant. I hit him with a hammer and something splattered in my eye, and the pain. I would not, the pain, because the poison got into his eye.
Yeah.
But he looks like Freddie Mercury. He's got a Freddie Mercury mustache.
But what's up with the the druggies tripping on the cane toad?
That's DMT. We should talk about that.
Oh yeah.
What's up?
And is it different from one frog to the other? I think just going back to the question, I think frogs is number 2 actually.
I think it's blood frogs. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can take that venom from a frog, toad. The Sonoran bullfrog in America does it, and here cane toads. And you can irritate it. You put it on a piece of glass and let it dry out. Or you can skin the frog and mix it in with some tobacco or marijuana, and you can smoke that as a type of drug. And if you want to see something really interesting and fun related to that, go on YouTube and type in Mike Tyson, do you know about the toad?
Right.
Because he's interviewed and he talks about having a spiritual.
Isn't he talking to Joe Rogan?
I don't think he's talking about Joe Rogan. I think he's talking to somebody else. But there's an animated version of it where he's like, someone animated his.
They do that a lot. Yeah. I love when they do that.
And it's like he smoked some toad and he saw God or something like. He's like, you know about the toad? Like, it's so funny. Yeah. But this is a similar thing. It's one of 2 types of DMT. It's not the type of DMT.
Some people lick it, and then some people scrape it, dry it, and smoke it.
Yeah.
Right? And, And if you
Well,
scrape it, dry it, and smoke it, is it the same as the kind of DMT you've talked about, Seth?
Okay, so I've smoked 2 types of DMT. This is I guess I'm going to be the deviant drug Seth right now. And I was told that the DMT that you see, fairies and elves and dimensions and stuff, that's a plant-based DMT. That's not, I think that's the MEO and not the 5-MEO, but you people who are watching.
So it's a slightly different chemical.
It's a slightly different chemical compound. The DMT that comes from the toad, you don't see anything. You just have a near-death experience. All I know is I went to a hotel room with this woman. She had this stuff. She filled up a balloon. She told me to inhale, and I was gone. I didn't feel like I shot off in a rocket. I didn't see anything. I was gone. I came back. She was like, wow, you were doing that really good. You were breathing like a little Buddha. Because you've seen me breathe. When you met me once, you were like, wow, you breathe amazingly well. You told me that once, Abram. Like I was.
You breathe very heavily.
I breathe very heavily. But anyway.
Robustly.
So she's like, oh, you're breathing like a little Buddha. Do you want some more? There's some left. And I said, sure, because I didn't see anything. And I had done other DMT and seen elves and talked to ancestors and seen pretty pictures and stuff. This time I was just like dead. I was nowhere. So she gave it to me, and then I woke up, and it was maybe a couple minutes later, and she goes, there's still some left. Do you want some more? And I was like, yeah, I didn't see anything. I want more. So I took the rest of it, and the same thing happened. And the next day I woke up, went home, kind of disappointed that I paid for this experience after having very visual DMT experiences. I went home and I went to sleep that night, and I woke up and I wrote this dream, this poem about this dream and loving life and people and women and God, and how I know that I'm blessed to be on Earth. But it wasn't visual at all. Michael Pollan, who went on Rogan, talked about doing this type of DMT too. And he said it was just like you took off in a rocket ship. It didn't feel like regular DMT to him. So that's
okay.
it. Now everyone who watches the show knows that I've done a.
Well, the documentary just skims the. I think it goes
really
into it for like 2 minutes.
They address it, and again, this is the '80s, so
I know.
Make of that what you will. They kind of address it more in the spirit of dare.
Derogatory.
This is some kind of keep your kids away from this stuff because they're bad people. The people who use this as a drug, they're bad, they're criminals, and we're going to arrest them. It was a very much like from that angle. Nobody was talking about this as if it was like a spiritual experience or a medicinal experience or anything of the like.
And it was the Nancy Reagan.
Reagan.
And don't worry, in another 10 years, after when people are like going really off the rails, abusing marijuana and hallucinogens like to insane degrees, it'll come back around, and we're going to be there all over again because humans are not capable of moderation.
Right. I just, it's funny because the film had some wild stylistic choices for a documentary. But for a documentary of that time, it's like, it's almost ahead of, because it's held back by the technology of 1988, the cameras and everything. Like you watch it and you go, God, what if this was shot in 6K now? Like,
well, they did make a sequel in 2010. Right. But I haven't seen it.
But even the cameras then were not as good as nature
great.
Cameras now. Yeah. So it's like you're seeing, it's almost, they really made a lot out of the tech they had at the time. And the way they approached the interviews. Yeah. It was actually really well done. And you're watching it on YouTube in this compressed way. I'm sure it looks even better when you get a VHS or SVHS or whatever.
No.
But the way they approached the interviews was totally, it was creative in a way you don't see documentary films of the 80s or even 70s. It was like breaking the rules.
It's like an art film.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. It's odd.
Yeah, it reminded me of Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control.
I never saw that.
You never saw Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control?
No. Have any of you done you guys dove into the rabbit hole of who the makers of this film were and what other stuff they've done? Because I didn't really do that.
I didn't do that.
I know he made the sequel in 2010.
He made the sequel to it,
but he made some other docs throughout the 90s and 2000s, and they were all done through Australian television. Like that's where he's from. Yeah. I want to just look him up.
Yeah, look that up.
I think we owe that to him since we're reviewing.
I think that's probably why he didn't go deeply into the drug thing, because probably the last thing you would want to do is, oh, by the way, these things that are taking over the entire north of coast
his name
of Australia.
His name is Mark Lewis, and actually he made a Disney movie called Gordy, or he was involved in a Disney movie he directed it.
Oh, cool. I could see it.
Yeah.
Is it an animated film or live action?
No, it was like, I think it was kind of like Pig.
Babe?
Babe. It was
Babe is another incredibly artsy, surreal, awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, I love Babe. He did Gordy, and he did The Wonderful World of Dogs. So this guy, I think we probably underappreciated him in this conversation. He's obviously
an artist.
Yeah,
and
it's a super artistic, film. It's great just on its own merits, even if it's not a subject that you would think would even interest you.
And I laughed out loud. And
it's
I
hilarious.
Watching documentaries
Yeah, I mean,
what about the guy who just like loves hunting, smashing them with his vehicle?
Smashing with his car, yeah.
Oh, that was something else. There were so many characters in this film.
Yeah, well, and then to find them and to sort of coax their behavior out of them in that way, and
also just the strong passions that people had about these things. Most people, I mean, obviously that's probably who they selected for, but you got people who absolutely love these toads and other people who hate them. You have politicians who want to make them like a regional symbol and create statues for them.
That was
fascinating. Official cane toad holiday. I mean, like, that guy was really funny. What was he, like a governor of one of
some province?
Provinces,
Queensland, right?
Queensland,
of the whole of Queensland. Okay, yeah. I mean, he's like, I just think this is a fantastic opportunity for now that the tourism industry is starting to boom in Australia, and people will come here and they know about our toads. And that guy was a real character.
Yeah,
it's so funny. I mean. Well,
I never would have seen this if it weren't for Seth Michael May.
Yeah, no way.
There's no way I would have ever.
I love obscure films.
No, it's not. It's not just that.
But it's also
everybody here does. But this specifically.
Well, also
this subject matter.
There is somewhat of a recurring theme. We started doing documentaries, about kind of not super early on, but maybe 10 or 15 episodes in, we did our first one. And we tend to find that's been a kind of recurring theme that Seth and I have selected documentaries that have some kind of subject matter or characters that we're really passionate about. So we did Surfwise, which was about Doc Paskowitz, who was a doctor. Do you know Surfwise, Dan?
No.
Yeah, that was.
I'll go back and watch.
Oh, dude, you got to go back and watch.
So you did a whole episode on. You did a whole episode.
We did a whole episode on Surfwise. There's this crazy doctor guy who basically just had 2 failed marriages, moved to Israel, wanted to join the paratroopers or something. They said no, and he just started. Then he brought he was like, "Fuck it, I'll just go surfing." And then he brought surf. He was a big surfer from the time he was young, and he quit all the these prestigious medical positions that he had when he was in Hawaii. He moved out to Israel. He brought surfing to the beaches of Tel Aviv. He met some woman and decided to have 10 kids with her and just travel around the country and just teach his kids surfing. All of his kids were surf champions. None of them went to school. They just lived on the road. And it's basically, he's 90 years old when they make he's in his 80s when they make the documentary, and he tells his story just bluntly. And it's just one of the most
surfing and sex.
Yeah. Surfing and sex. Yeah. He talks a lot about sex. And then we did another documentary about sex that Seth chose, which was quite interesting.
It was about a sex surrogate.
Yeah, called Private Practices, right?
Yeah.
A story of a sex surrogate, which is basically it's something in between a sex therapist and a prostitute.
Right.
And then now we're doing this one, and
there's a movie called Surrogate. There's a movie. This is a documentary
with William H. Macy. Yeah.
Is that what it was?
Yeah. Oh, really? Did we touch on that? Because I don't even remember.
We talked about it briefly.
Okay. Yeah. So I have a couple of I have a backlog of documentaries that I have in mind for us to do, and I guess I'm next to select a documentary. But
there was. I want to just go over, because Isaac and Abram and I have talked about this. You can go to Florida where there's a huge indigenous endangerment by invasive species to the indigenous species. You can go there and you can hunt Burmese pythons.
They pay you.
The government will pay you $20 a head for Burmese pythons, because they've all been thrown out by the pet industry or from these mega farms down there. They're hurricanes. They escaped during the hurricane.
So that's more interesting on a certain level to me, because this seems to be a mechanical, the cane toad thing is sort of a mechanical problem that has gone terribly wrong. Mm-hmm. But these Burmese pythons don't seem to have been bred to try to solve any problem other than the strange appetites of strange people for exotic pets.
Yeah.
And what I want to know is what the fuck kind of person needs to have a Burmese python?
Oh, I'll introduce you to some. It's,
I mean,
you know these guys, don't you?
I do. I know.
Like in Russia, you have people with pet, wild cats,
Bears. They wrestle
and
them.
bears. And I mean, it's amazing.
There was just a bill that came up about trying to stop this. It's not just like Tiger King. There is a huge exotic pet market, and people want to have weird pets, and it's sad because people don't think about the size of the animal. And a Burmese python will get to be about 21, 22, 23 feet long and heavy. Like that's a snake that you and another person have to take care of together if you want to take it out of a tank when it's full grown. And they're all over. Another thing that's today I found out was World Hippo Day. And while hippos are having problems in Africa, what's his name? The drug lord, Pablo Escobar had a zoo. And while they were clearing it out,
he got all kinds of exotic animals.
The hippos got loose. So Colombia has a population of hippos now that's destroying that region of the Amazon. Wow. And they don't know what to do with them because a lot of people want to fly there and see Pablo Escobar's hippos.
That begs the question, how much did the Romans with their antics, because they were as obsessed as any culture or group of people with exotic animals from all over the far reaches of the empire, and they were introduced. How much did they disrupt the
they caused the extinction of the European lion. We know that. Fine.
But what about it, like an inversion of that, where they actually did they cause the proliferation of species or were they mainly just throwing these guys into the Colosseum and hunting, killing them and using did they actually create proliferations of unnatural species and other weird ecosystems?
I haven't heard that. Most of the stuff that I heard about the Romans were they caused
the extinction of the European lion. Not just European, probably parts
European leopard and the dwarf elephant.
And a lot of these animals, he probably wiped a lot of these out of North Africa too.
Yeah, that's where the dwarf elephant came from, North Africa.
Right. Okay.
The species of elephant that probably Hannibal was using.
I mean, using them for what? Because of hunting, or using them for gladiators, or what was the situation there?
They were using them for gladiators. Those games, man, were
that was their NFL.
Yeah, that was their NFL, and I guess it was a good job.
I'm all for it. Honestly, the more I actually see the reality that we live in for what it is, the less tolerance I have for hypocrisy. And the types of barbaric shit that humans do today, it's no different and no worse than the stuff that we're doing during the Roman time. If people want to bring back, if you want to be consistent, if people want to bring back, there's plenty of Africans that would be happy to give their lions away. If you want to bring your lions to Texas to some kind of mega arena and have a show where some tough guy who thinks he's like the man is going to show you that he can defeat a lion in battle.
I'm amazed that the Spanish bullfighting is still a thing. It's
exactly.
The animal rights activists haven't done
anything. You can go on the internet and you can pay money to have a drone or a robot with a shotgun or whatever hunting rifle go through a maze of cages and shoot a lion that way, and then they'll skin it or do whatever and send it to you. There is a whole hunting culture like that, so it does exist.
I know, and I think we should stop being so video game about it and actually make it real. If you are that much of a badass, I'm tired of seeing men beat each other up. I want to see a man beat up a lion with his bare hands.
Spoken like a true Hemingway.
Yeah, dude.
It's
there are a lot of people
I don't honestly. I'll give you my personal opinion. I don't like any of it. If we could diminish the amount of violence that we can consume, and we could start to change our appetites and our environments to a point where we become a kinder, gentler, less insane species, I want to move in that direction. All I'm saying is I've kind of given up on that because from what I see, humanity doesn't want that.
Let me link that to another Australian phenomenon. Remember when what was his name? The crocodile hunter, when he died, Steve Irwin.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right.
Steve Irwin, every animal person knew Steve Irwin was going to.
He got murked by a stingray, didn't he?
Got killed by a stingray. Now the Australian reaction to that, stingrays are pretty harmless. He was pissing off the stingray, and it got him. It went right into his heart. For months after that, I'm told, and I've read, Australians were going out and killing stingrays for their national hero, Steve Irwin, as like revenge. They were like going out and cutting them in half and feeding them to sharks and like, you know, just showing what. So, I mean, the problem with bringing all that stuff back is I don't think it would make for a kinder, gentler people. I think people would start going, oh, well, a lion killed my boy, so now I got.
No, I wasn't arguing that it would make us kinder or gentler.
Yeah.
I was saying I've given up on us trying to be kinder or gentler.
Oh, okay.
So just bring it on. If you say you want the insane violence, just go all the way, go all out. Like if you want to show how tough of a guy you are on national television, go fight a lion. You know,
or
with no rules. The lion doesn't have any rules. Like you know, he's not human. Like. You got all this it's so civilized, bashing each other's brains in with gloves. You know, it's so civilized. So instead of like cutting their faces and breaking your fist, now you're getting 1,000 subconcussive blows to the head with those pillows on your hands. But it's so much more civilized. It's not. It's less civilized. We're less civilized than the Romans were in a lot of ways. At least you hit a guy with a broadsword, and like the consequences are pretty obvious. Nowadays, these guys are like drooling all over themselves. They're getting brain damage and they're like going psychotic and like, you know, becoming violent towards their families because they have this long-term brain damage from smashing their heads into other men. You know, I don't watch football anymore. It's actually, to me, it's more barbaric. How do we get on this whole subject? It's more barbaric than
we were talking about
the
Romans wiping out
wiping out all the animals.
Yeah.
Right. I think there's some kind of justification. There's a justice in it. You know, you don't have two men ruining each other's. You want to go out there and show how tough you are. Pitch yourself against a wild beast. Show us what you got. And if you lose, you become food. You know, it's like it evens the playing field a little bit. You become lion food.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, most of tribal society was honest about it. I mean,
exactly. That's the problem I have is the dishonesty.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I think, you know, in America, when it was a real frontier country, we were used to that. That was part of our tradition. That's why they had, I don't know if you guys have watched this Middle Yellowstone, the one that's set in 1923.
No, I haven't.
Okay. Well, there's a whole.
Well, that was the most dangerous thing. The thing that killed humans, you know, over 100 years ago, the things that killed humans the most in the world and even in America was nature itself, was the elements, was the environment. You know, so whether it be like, you know, other humans that were hunting that were going to kill you, or like
bears,
harsh weather, or parasites, or all these other things that we have good solutions for nowadays, gunshot wounds, you know. Which you can largely recover from unless, you know, it hits a major artery or whatever. But like, a lot of the things that were killing people then don't kill us now. Now, most of the shit that kill people are man-made, are man-made environmental toxins.
Yeah.
So, you know, everybody thinks that, it's just like progress is a straight line. No, it's not. We come up with solutions, we make things better, and then we also make other shit worse. And it is what it is. But that's where we're at now. Yeah. And in terms of all this ecology stuff, it's just another thing, you know, like this idea that like we started off, Dan was saying, you know, humans playing God. And I do kind of want to return to that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We are supposed to play God to a degree. If you believe that we're created in God's image, we have certain privileges as a result of having somewhat of a reflection of God. Not that we are, but that we have a reflection of him. And we have the ability to do these things that can manipulate the environment and you know, bring about potentially positive changes. But we got to be really damn careful and conscientious about how we go about doing it, because whenever we think we have a good idea, you know, that thing, especially if there's a way to monetize it off of other people's ignorance, that thing can become monstrous beyond our imagination to the point where it affects the future generations for long into the future. And, you know, we really do have to be conscientious when we talk about this stuff and think about it, because it's not a game, and you can't just fuck with the environment without really like being very, very conscientious about it. I don't know.
Sure.
Anyway.
That's a good note to end on.
Yeah.
That says it all.
And we're almost an hour in.
We're an hour in.
And so, yeah, props to the Cane Toad documentary, folks. And I will definitely try to check out the sequel that came out in 2010. And let's talk about what we have on schedule for next time. What are we planning on doing here?
We're going to do Silent Running.
Which is a science fiction film, right?
A science fiction film, also environmental. And we're going to have Sanja O'Hara as a guest because she's worked with Bruce Dern. And Bruce Dern is pretty much acting alone with 3 robots who are really paraplegic people in robot suits. Because this is pre-R2-D2, pre-ILM.
Wait, does Bruce Dern play the ranch owner in the last Tarantino film?
Yes.
Yeah, he does.
That's Bruce Dern, isn't it?
That's
Holy
Spawn.
shit.
Yeah, that was supposed to be.
He played Spawn.
He plays Spawn. It was supposed to be.
That's the last thing I saw in it.
It was supposed to be Burt Reynolds, right?
Burt Reynolds died.
Oh my god, dude! Bruce, that's amazing. I've never seen him do it anything short of brilliant.
He's a great actor, and so we wanted to go on this Bruce Dern sort of tangent because we have access to Sanja.
Cool.
Who's worked with him.
That's what's up. So we're going to do Silent Runnings next, and that will be next Wednesday at 9:30.
Yep.
Is it Silent Running or Silent Runnings?
I think it's Silent Runnings, I think.
I believe
it might be Silent Running.
Who directed it? Nobody is obscure
director? I don't think it's an obscure director. I think it's someone who actually might have done like
no, it's stuff. Singular.
I've never seen it.
Silent Running.
Silent Running.
Not to be confused with Cool Runnings.
Not to be cool.
About the Jamaican bobsled team.
Right.
True story.
Now, who directed it?
Douglas Trumbull.
Yeah, Douglas Trumbull.
Who also directed what? It sounds very familiar.
Douglas Trumbull. No, he didn't.
He pioneered methods in special effects and created scenes for 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Oh yes.
Oh, so he was a visual effects.
He was a visual
guy.
Effects
He was
supervisor.
A visual effects guy.
Yeah, visual effects on 2001, on Close Encounters of the Third Kind, on Star Trek: The Motion Picture, on Blade Runner, on The Tree of Life, and he directed the movies Silent Running and Brainstorm. So he didn't have a huge directorial.
No, but
career.
he had a huge influence because he's the guy who they think might have faked the moon landing, right?
Or would have been heavily involved in it because he would have been the visual. He would have been the visual effects guy because that was around the same time that he was working with Kubrick on 2001.
Right.
Yeah. After he did 2001, everybody wanted him.
Yeah. Now, what probably happened is that there was an actual moon landing with low resolution photography done by the astronauts, and they needed to do a better press release, so they hired guys to do, in addition to that, even more stuff. This is how stupid conspiracies that could have been avoided get started, because it's like, you know, the public's not dumb. Just tell them what the fuck is. You don't.
Well, I mean, there's a picture of Arthur C. Clarke, Stanley Kubrick, and a bunch of other guys walking into. Arthur C. Clarke consulted with NASA all the time. So it's like there's a link there, but it doesn't. But it does make sense to just be like, well, this looks awful. No one's going to think that we went to the moon if it looks like this.
That reminds me, though, you bring up Arthur C. Clarke. Do you know that Arthur C. Clarke was the science? He authored a book in the 50s, or maybe it was the late 40s, that detailed pretty accurately how satellite technology would work. Before that satellite, it was the first, I think it was the first description of satellite technology that was in any kind of mainstream capacity. And it predated actual and influenced in some regards
it's
the
a
actual
huge
development
deal. If you
of satellite technology.
Yeah, there's a
science fiction is the most important genre of fiction, in my opinion.
He lived in the Chelsea Hotel, and there's that podcast, The Art of Darkness. They either have one on Arthur C. Clarke or it's the one on Chelsea Hotel where they talk about him exclusively. And I can't believe this because I always thought of Stanley Kubrick as kind of like an uptown guy. But evidently Stanley Kubrick was going to the Chelsea Hotel and hanging out with Arthur C. Clarke to write. I would have thought that he would be like, uptown at like the Dakota or like,
No, he was always Plaza. A village. He was always a village rat when he was a young man. Yeah. Played chess in Washington Square Park.
Well, I knew that, but I just never saw him like hanging out with in the drug scene that was the Chelsea Hotel
he was actually he would drink the tea, like the marijuana tea. That was Kubrick's thing.
Really?